Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 10:04 on Thursday, January 11th. My name is John Belamowitz. I'm the chair of the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists. I'm calling this meeting to order. Ms. Moore, will you call the roll for us, please?
Sure. Mr. Adler,
Here.
Mr. Bridges,
Here.
Dr. Becker,
Present.
Ms. Calhoun, absent, Dr. Cartwright,
Here.
Dr. Lambden,
Here.
Dr. Singh,
Yes.
and Mr. Zagars.
Here.
Very good.
All right. We have
Thank
a
you,
quorum.
everybody, for being here and on time. Much appreciated. We're going to go into public comment now. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per individual unless otherwise directed. Please note that the board may not discuss or take action under any matter raised during public comment, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. Limited public comment will be allowed prior to us taking up some rulemaking later in the meeting. And we'll get to that, and I'll ask for hands raised again from anybody on Zoom if you'd like to speak at that point. So with that, turn it over to Ms. Moore.
We do have one hands up from Ms. Gotruth.
Dr. Gerthues. Very
Give
good.
me 1 second here. All right.
Hello.
Good
Hi
morning.
there.
Good morning. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Dr. Carol Grothies. I'm representing TPA as the chair of the TSB PBHEC Monitoring Committee. We just wanted to add some information perspective on the EPPP issue as the deadline is looming and we're aware of the many obstacles facing adoption, including the antitrust concerns mentioned at the last BHEC meeting by Mr. Spinks. Opposition is not local to Texas. The SPTAs in many jurisdictions are unhappy about the EPPP2 for many reasons. Boards in several states will find it difficult or impossible to meet the rollout deadline for the EPPP2 and continue to be concerned about the increased cost as well as the known discriminatory issues of the test against underrepresented groups. However, we do not think the answer is to eliminate an examination requirement for licensure. Most occupations have an exam requirement, which typically involves a minimum knowledge set for obtaining licensure, and this will affect psychologists' mobility to other states as well as their SIPACT involvement. Given the number of states that share concerns about the forced acceptance of both parts of the EPPP exams, we think there is a good chance that ASPPB can be pushed to reconsider, but that has to come from you. We respectfully ask that TSBEP write a letter to ASPPB asking for a delay of implementation for at least a year and have the merits of EPPP2 debated on the floor of the ASPPB meeting. If Mr. Spinks could contact some of his counterpoints across the country to ask them to sign off on it, if the Texas representative to ASPPB should raise objections from the floor at the next meeting, we think this could be accomplished. We will continue to reach out to other state associations and get their support and involvement in this issue, but you have to lead the charge. But if there's anything that we can do, please let us know. We appreciate your concern and discussion in this matter.
Thank you, Dr. Grothues. And I appreciate your comment. I'm actually going to call an audible on the order of the agenda. We've got item 9, discussion of the EPPP part 2. I'm going to bump that up to after the chair's report. So Dr. Grothues, I really appreciate your comments today.
Thank you.
There are no other hands raised, and we do not have any attendee joining by phone.
Very good. Thank you very much. So moving to chair's report. This is going to dovetail with item 9 about the discussion of the EPPP2. So to my fellow board members, obviously we've talked about EPPP2, and so in the effort to figure out how we're going to break this logjam, I have had discussions with ASPPB. I have voiced my own concerns in terms of the structural elements of adopting such a big change, just the mechanics of how we would pass a rule that big. We have problems there. There's anti-competitive issues, that there are problems there legally. From a policy perspective, I think there are concerns with the directive that the legislature has given us to reduce, eliminate, streamline unnecessary barriers. And this is obviously an additional barrier with additional cost. regarding the cost, we just spent a lot of time looking at all our fees and costs to make them a little bit more uniform and fair across the different professions. And so this is outside of that. This is not tabulated because we don't receive this money. This is going to ASPPB. And so I have voiced all these concerns. Oh, and then the discriminatory aspect of it as well. You don't even, if that's not enough, if you come at it from the questions of how it affects minority populations, there's plenty of questions, and I've heard plenty of very well-reasoned arguments of why those concerns are valid. With those conversations and having relayed those concerns to ASPPB, I spoke with them yesterday, and their position has not changed since their last board meeting. So we are just as much of a stalemate today as we were before. I don't have the solution for it. Daryl, I'm going to call on you for a second just for a clarification. Dr. Grothies made a point in terms of the alternative is not essentially to bail out. We should have a test. The alternative is not to bail out on it. Statutorily, this board does not have the power to get rid of a test, an entrance test. Is that correct?
Right. We have to have a test.
That's a statutory thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now just to make sure, but I'm 99.9% sure we have to have a test. That's
okay. So I'm 99.9% sure as well that we don't even have the power to not have a test. The legislature has said thou shalt have a test. So we have to do that. So
yeah,
that's the lay of the land as I see it. Is that right, Daryl?
Yeah, we do. It's a shall.
All right. That's a shall. That's the lay of the land. That's where we are. The deadline is looming. We have one legislative session ahead of that to get this right if the legislature needed to have a legislative fix. But the floor is open to your concerns and comments on how we crack this nut.
So what are our practical options here? Like,
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's in terms of having a test, you could partner with other states that also have concerns. Daryl and staff has outlined pretty clearly the mountain. I don't know, Daryl, how would you characterize making our own test?
Way above my capabilities.
Okay.
I mean, I think that is the challenge, though, is that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Making a test is not, it's not necessarily a feasible, making a licensure test at the state level is so foreign to what we do. You're talking about a David and Goliath type of a thing.
I agree with you.
we're not
Right.
qualified.
There are probably people in our state who might be qualified, but the process of doing that in a place that makes it valid, you're talking about invalidating, things like SIPAC and going way outside the box in ways that don't make a lot of sense for our constituency. And I appreciate Dr. Groth's point, which is this was never debated on the floor of ASPPB in a way that allows informed jurisdictions to openly discuss this, which I think is a point that needs to come back to the states to be able to talk about these issues openly, because what we've essentially been put in the position of talking about is adapt this format in this way or else, right? So the initial product of EPPP2 was initially proposed as EPPP1, for those of you who are not psychologists in the room, is a format that is meant to be skills and competency based, okay? For a licensing board, that makes a lot of sense theoretically, right? We're a practicing registrative board, okay? And the EPPP1 is very foundational around things that you learn in school that are very basic knowledge that may or may not be part of your practice competency. things like statistics, things about neurobiological bases, development, all of which are foundational skills, but it's very learned, memorized knowledge. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's much more global. And a lot of people, it comes from psychology as a general base is very, very broad. Okay, so the argument has always been, does the licensing exam really get into skills and competency to practice at a licensing level? So there was always a thought that at some point states would be able to choose between EPPP1 or EPPP2, and there might be other options. And or that the EPPP1 could be part of the competency. There were different discussions about this in the mix. And somehow, or that EPPP2 might replace EPPP1 at some point in time. And that discussion all went away, and ASPPB came in and said, offline, no discussion with the states, no vote on this. You're going to do both. These two things are now going to be one exam, two parts, one before the license, one after the license, and two charges. Not that we've been told what that charge is going to be. You have 4 years to adopt that.
I want to come back to just put a bigger, I don't know, just because I was there when it rolled out at the annual meeting, when we were all, and it, to your point, wasn't discussed. The fact that the email to go out to the whole wide world of sports was timed to go out as they were telling us in the room what they had decided about this being not optional. It seemed very deliberate to exclude states from the discussion of this forced adoption. And this is just more of venting here. It bothers me to see and hear about how ASPPB desires to be reflective of the needs of its member boards, because it's not serving us right now. It's not reflecting the needs of how we regulate with this cram down.
I think, I agree with both of your points, what you've said. I think we have something that's obviously complicated, complex to resolve here, but I don't think it's something that is not possible. And I think there's enough people, there's enough boards and states that feel the same way. And again, to Dr. Becker, your point, we are between a rock and a hard place. And I also agree that, there were different ways to come to this point. And so we were not really part of the discussion, states and regulatory bodies. And I think that there's enough resistance that we can perhaps, join resources with other states that also have the similar feelings. I know I've talked to a couple of other one other state that feels the same way, and they have felt that way for a long time, that also would be willing to have a discussion about what to do in terms of, and it seems like at this point we're left in the position where we don't have any way of assessing our applicants to the profession, that really we have no choice but to basically, and I think we don't have that, obviously, that ability. I think there are people that do this for a living, Pearson and educational services. And there's a lot of corporations that this is their business and this is what they do. And I understand that that's it's a long time consuming sort of a feat. But I think with combined resources, I think it can be done. When I was at the annual meeting in October, I did talk to, when I went to the new member training, and I did talk to Dr. Singh about the validity of the test. She did say to me, and I want to quote.
Are we talking about Dr. Song?
Sorry, Song.
Okay.
Dr. Song, I apologize. She said to me at that time, she said that that they don't have the technical numbers right now. And in fact, the last time I looked up at the data, it is the District of Columbia who's currently has EPPP Part 2 implemented. It is Georgia and is Nevada in the United States. And so it's understandable why they don't have the data, because the numbers are so small. And, you know, I noticed that a lot of the discussions have been about item development and subject matter experts and, you know, culturally, because I think, you know, and they should, I think it's the right thing to do, to listen to the feedback about, you know, how it could very well be discriminatory, to make sure that it's culturally sensitive, some of the items. But if you build a car, it could have great parts to it, but you really have to talk about whether it gets you collectively where you need it to go to take you. And that's, I don't think, what we have. We don't have that at this point. And, you know, I just, you know, I also felt, I think what the other attendees have also done to, you know, that have assisted at ASPPB meetings, whether they be annual meetings or half yearly meetings. And I kind of feel that this is not something that wants to be, you know, that there's an open discussion about. I feel that the structure has changed. It feels less like a resource sort of collect agency, and it feels more like, you know, the power or the structure has shifted. It feels that way to me. It's just my personal opinion.
What do you mean the structure? Tell me more.
Well, I think that when you have an agency that is there to facilitate, is there to provide resources, a consultation, which I think, you know, from my understanding, they still do have that role. But in this particular area, and there may be others, I'm new to all this and I don't know ASPPB and don't have the history being involved with that particular organization. I think there's a lot of positive things that can be done and that they offer, but it feels viscerally, and I think that's what we're all saying that have been there, that it feels now like we're being led to a particular place without any exits. It's just my feeling.
So like, it sounds like in summary, we have two central issues with implementing EPPP 2. One is our concern with the actual validity of the test, the items, things like that, you know, the technical aspect. The other is how it was basically, what I gather is it feels like a mandate, right? It feels like we are being commanded to do this and cut out of any influential discussions about our concerns. So in principle, like, we feel that we've never been able, you know, to have a frank discussion. For whatever reason, they decided to do it that way. I can only guess, and maybe some people know better than I, but it seems like, you know, so it's hard to buy into something when we have two very central concerns. One is with the exam itself, which is, you know, is our responsibility. If we put it out there, we have to have a lot of confidence because this is our state, and this is people coming into our state trying to get licensed. And we take responsibility for that. Any additional examination that we require of them. And then the other aspect is, you know, feels like we were treated as if we were, you know, like you said, being led, you know, and in principle, that's not how we would want to, you know, be told to do something. And that in itself is a huge problem. So I think sometimes we need to do what we think is right. When you do what we feel like, you know, if there's something we feel like that's coming down that we oppose for good reason, I don't want to see us, you know, cave to some pressure where we have these strong feelings about two main issues of the exam, how it's implemented, you know, and how it was mandated to us. So sometimes, that's why we're here, is to do what we feel is right in our heart. And there's a lot of, these are not small issues, that we have problems with.
If I may express a concern, and part of it involves an opinion regarding Dr. Becker's statement. EPPP1, I mean, we memorize the stuff, we read it in various textbooks, we hear lectures on it, and it becomes ingrained information in our information processing. That's EPPP1. The EPPP2 evaluates competency. And I am not sure that upon graduation that we graduate competent people. I mean, the reason you get competent is because you go out and work with a problem enough, and then you say, yeah, I can deal with this. So we're going to be giving a test to people before maybe they have competence in these issues, in these areas. And so I'm more willing to go along with EPPP2 once a person works out there, and like we discussed before the meeting on the postdoc. Arizona doesn't have one. Well, I don't know how those people are going to be getting competency if they're not working under the two psychologists in the program with other workers, comparing ideas. So we're going to go give somebody a test on competency before they go out there and become competent. Now, that's an opinion now.
It's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's interesting. ASPPB has 2 board members from Arizona. And I understand that this may be great for Arizona based on how they are, but there's 50 states. We do this 50 different ways. And this is a one size fits all approach that's just being foisted upon us.
Yeah, and I think we also get into the barrier to entry issues of, first of all, there's a increased cost that just makes it harder for a common person to go ahead and get licensed fully. And you've got, again, the discriminatory issues that we've discussed and some of the item validity deadline really quickly coming soon, where we're kind of like forced to make this decision. There's a lot of pressure there. And, again, just feeling, I guess part of my thought too was just what are other states saying? Like, what is the general consensus, of these other states? Like, do we have like a temperature on that, or does anyone know?
I don't know. I've had a handful of conversations where I've heard private griping. Whether or not those states are going to publicly push back, I don't know. It's a great question. However, when we're looking at the issues that we're facing, I look at other states to, as laboratories of democracy to see what are they doing that's working. I'd like to know what they're doing, but I'm not going to let that weigh into my decision-making that much. We've got to do what's right for Texas.
And I also think, like, going back to the original point, just like being able to debate the issue, being able to have a discussion, an open discussion, and even a potential vote on it. I think that's where a lot of the, some of the problems stem from, just not really having an ability up front to voice pros and cons, and how that would fit for one state, and maybe it would work for one state, maybe not for another, but to just make it the standard that all have to do. I think that that is kind of where lays the rub, at least to me.
To your point there too, in terms of who's deciding this and who gets to vote on this, the board members of ASPPB are primarily composed of pretty small states. I think it's like Nebraska,
Arizona, Louisiana,
Nevada, Manitoba, Canada is on there. I believe it's Manitoba, one of the Canadian provinces. That's not representative of the challenges facing a large state like ours, I don't think. Not to say that they can't make good decisions, it's not a disqualifier, but the fact that it wasn't voted on by the membership and the makeup of the board is states very much unlike our own. It doesn't feel like we have a voice.
I'd like to bring up another point. I think that the EPPP Part 2 there's a lot of contention behind the implementation of it. And, during one of the presentations by Dr. Tony DeBono, who gave one of the talks about DEI and implementation in Ottawa, in that particular province. I was looking under the Q&A in the app that we were given and we had to download for the conference. And I was surprised that the question had been asked, and I quote, "What would it take to move towards being, quote, board certified, unquote, on some regular basis, much like physicians do? Could/should that include demonstrating continuing competence through something like part 2 of the EPPP every 10 years or so?" So I'm surprised that the question is being asked about implementing it with licensed psychologists, when there's so much discussion and pushback on the EPPP Part 2 to begin with for applicants.
And we're already talking about now asking the question, exploring if it's going to be an ongoing 10-year thing. Yeah.
And the other thing too, just we've discussed this a little bit in previous meetings, but then the fact that there hasn't been anything for the last 5 years, and then like what has gone wrong since that. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way it should be, but it's just a point of discussion, that
I think it's a very valid point. I mean, if we're going to impose new regulation or new standard or new barrier or something like that, why? Why are we doing it? What problem is it solving? And you're struggling with the same thing. It sounds like I'm struggling with. Why? What are we solving for here?
Well, and I think and I won't cut you off, Dr. Cartwright, but I think that is the question, is what are we solving for? Because I'm not sure that there are a lot of jurisdictions that are looking at this and saying it's a problem. ASPPB is saying that it's a problem. I think that, when we had Sunset and it came in and said our oral is a problem, I think that there is a question around, do we have an issue with competency and assessing competency? And if this is the solution to assessing competency, then to Dr. Lambden's point, show us the data. And what I take most issue with as a scientist is you're giving me a mandate to implement something that you won't show me the data for. So I'm really, really struggling with that, because this feels like a move towards national regulation without data. And I really struggle with getting behind that as a mandate when you won't show it to me.
Yeah. I think you bringing up Sunset is a really great point. When we go through Sunset, I actually got to go through Sunset twice in back-to-back legislatures because they just punted it at the last minute. We had to do it again the next year. Sunset is the time for the legislature to be able to chime in and recommend changes for how the legislature sees how they want to regulate something like this. For us to do this mid-cycle in the middle of Sunset without any, well, I take that back. We did get direction from the legislature this biennium. Reduce, eliminate unnecessary barriers, streamline the ones you've got. That was their direction, and this runs counter to that. Sunset will get a chance to chime in on this when we go through it next time. But I think midstream like this. I'm glad you brought that up.
So in talking with Dr. Song, one of the things that she indicated to me was that the oral exam, which the EPPP Part 2 in the assessment of skills is meant to replace. And she talked about how very biased that is, because of course you have individuals who form part of oral boards or committees that applicants go up against. But again, I think we're talking about the obvious. If something is biased, why replace it with something that is not able to demonstrate validity? And there's fixes for that. There's ways to get around that. You could create video vignettes where it's across the board, everybody sees the same vignette. You could make sure that it meets, it's representative of all sorts of individuals. You have testing centers and testing sites, sort of what College Board does, and you score it on a computer. You score it, computer-based scoring. So I don't think that that's kind of a sort of a hurdle that can't be overcome. I think that, there are ways around it that we could make it halfway efficient for the oral in that particular part. But even even if we were going to do that, I think that's a problem because now we're left without EPPP Part 2 and its counterpart, what it assesses, which is knowledge, foundational knowledge. So that's really the challenge for us. I think the EPPP Part 2, the skills assessment, I think that's, there are ways around that to assess competency. That's not a huge hurdle. I don't think it's easy, but I think it can be done.
It seems like ASPPB is blinded by their own agenda or ambition to get this out in a speedy fashion without, obviously, any talk would slow the development down. Any, further like taking input from everybody else would slow it down. And I don't know, why they're of that position, but we have concerns about this, and like Dr. Becker was saying, show us the data. I think that's a great position or a great, thing to come with. I mean, like, you want us to adopt things, we just can't adopt something if you think it's so easy for people of our state for not having any idea of the repercussions, any idea about the makeup of it. How do you think, is this a reasonable request to make, and we won't accommodate it at this time. However, if you were to be more collaborative, I think more collaborative stance, stop their agenda of how long they want implemented throughout, the country, and listen, then one day, when it's ready and when it's completely has addressed all the issues we have with it, we're not against it, theoretically, but at this time, the way it's being implemented, we are against it. But we do want to collaborate more, and that's our position. But we cannot accept it at this time without further collaboration.
I think we have to be careful with that stance, though, Mr. Adler, for a very specific reason, which is they have really strong-armed this position of all or nothing. So to take that position leaves us vulnerable to not having an exam, which is untenable and also contrary to our current legislative and regulatory statutes. So that's really why we're between a rock and a hard place, because we can't really do either thing. And I think that's where we have to come back to the position of, we need to have an open discussion about this, because you have put us regulatorily in this no man's land, which is we don't have the opportunity to decline this mandate, nor are we actually in a position to appropriately adopt it. So we need to actually openly be able to debate the challenge that you have put us in from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think that's the position that we might need to take. And I appreciate that TPA is actually saying the same thing.
I think it's not just that I think you alluded to it, but when I jump on what you said there, I don't think we can adopt it. Like, structurally, I don't think that with the hurdles, and I've war gamed this in my mind, 100 ways. Even if the board were to begrudgingly go along with it,
I don't know that our legislature will.
Exactly. That's my point, is that they've put us in this impossible position. We can't adopt it. They can change their mind or work with us.
Well,
and the point is that in my discussions with them, multiple discussions with them, and what I heard yesterday from them is our position remains the same.
I just think we need to take it to an open discussion of, you have made this very clear what your national position is towards pushing a national regulatory mandate, without discussion of what that means from a national landscape with different legislative directives and dictates and regulatory responses.
To that point, our next board meeting is April 11th.
do they even have the authority to do as they've done?
Yes, it's their test. They're not a governmental entity. They can, it is their test. They can do whatever
It
they
is
want
their
with it.
proprietary, and that is sort of our rock in the hard place. It's their proprietary information that we have adopted into our regulatory statutes. And so we really are not in the position to move away from it or to adopt something else that goes contrary to the directive that we've been given by our legislature.
I'm not, I guess, we can't see it as kind of like we adopt it or we don't adopt it. We have to figure out a way to reach them, like saying like, we want this to work. Like, you know, we just have to do it in a very deliberate fashion. And we are concerned for the people of our state. We just can't, good conscience, adopt it at this point, but we want to. Please talk with us.
We at least need the opportunity to present that position.
I mean, like, this is what's our barrier. And I know you care about the field. I know you care, but like, this is our state. And I don't know if you've considered repercussions for every single state of how this will be implemented, but it's our job as people that serve the state of Texas to foresee anything like that. And it's not fair, or it's simply unjust for us to just, you know, start requiring of this without understanding more about the tests. It's irresponsible. It's unethical.
Well, and I think if I might, you know, Dr. Becker, you made a good point about approaching it from a data validation standpoint and saying, show us the data. We're willing to work with you. We're willing to talk. You know, I think that's the approach we take on that, is from a purely, we're willing to play ball. We're willing to extend that olive branch, but we have to see the data because, you know, and Dr. Cartwright, you beat me to the punch on this comment, but from a barrier to entry standpoint, you know, our duty is to the state of Texas and the people of Texas. And part of that is not just, you know, ensuring that that psychologists are well-trained and well-qualified, but also eliminating enough barriers to entry so that we can still have people practice psychology in the state of Texas. And if that's the directive from the state, and I'd be willing to bet our state legislature is not the only one making that directive to their regulatory bodies, then we don't have an ability to accept that, frankly.
Right. It's not about our personal feelings. It's right. We're not, you know, personally hurt, but like, as nothing to do with it, we have concerns that should be, that need to be respected.
So I think y'all would be proud of me. All of these things that you've been saying, I began voicing that at the national meeting when it was rolled out. And I said, I think these are the problems we're going to have. This is what I foresee in my tea leaves for this problem. And over the past month, I have had hours of multiple meetings, phone calls, Zoom meetings with multiple board members of ASPPB, including their CEO. And they've been very cordial. And it's been, they have listened very clearly. I don't think they have not heard the concerns. It is that their position has not changed. And if we need to get more of us all together to say the same thing, I am all for it.
What is the basis of their obstinance, you know, like to this? Like what are they, like what do they have to gain by not you know, listening to us? I mean, it's almost like,
I have ideas, but as not a psychologist, I don't want to. I have a hard time opining on their motivations. They obviously care about the test. They have a lot invested in the test.
that's not the reason.
But I mean, it's something they've worked very hard on.
Sure.
And it only works if states adopt it.
Sure. But not by being strong-armed.
Well,
They wouldn't want to lose the EPPP part 1 though either, right? Because you're saying it's like an all or nothing package, correct?
No, they have told us, yeah, EPPP part 1 is as a standalone, we are no longer offering that after 2026. It is gone. You cannot have it unless you're willing to adopt 2.
Right.
It is.
I mean, if it was optional, obviously, but
Oh, that would be
they're
the
gonna,
solve.
but then
Yeah.
who would choose to, you know?
Well, some
implement?
states have.
Right.
I mean, Arizona will.
Uh-huh.
I think for sure they will. They have 2 board members on ASPPB that are also part of the Arizona board. What did you say? DC's already adopted it.
DC, Nevada, and Georgia.
Okay, and the board, the ASPPB president is from Nevada. That makes sense.
And they're located physically, their offices are in Georgia.
Right.
Mhm.
So if it works for them, go for it. But I think it's clear it's not working for Texas as it sits. So,
Hmm. May
yes,
I
absolutely,
s-
Dr. Singh.
I just, excuse me, I just want to say that, we've said the same things over and over again several times. And, and we have same concerns, but nothing has changed, neither on their end nor on our end. And, but we'll have to come to terms with this situation one way or the other. And is there any way we can collect information from the 3 states that have adopted as to what their, how they feel about it? And is it detrimental in some way, or is it they like it, or any pros and cons about it? Because that would help us to make decision. Right now, we have no data on, anything to go on, other than we have lots of emotional arguments, and they don't matter in business like that. And what matters is the facts, and we need to find those facts somehow. And if it's working for them, if it's not hurting, then we can consider it, but we're not stuck by it. We could maybe, if we get to the point where we have to adopt it, then we could, and then have some way to spend time and effort in creating our own test. And then once we have that ready, we can get out of it. Is that possible?
I mean, in terms of like Nevada, I've had extensive conversations with Dr. Paul, who I don't know if she's the board chair in Nevada or not, but she's the president of ASPPB. It works for their state. I can't regurgitate all of her arguments for it, but it works for them. So that's all I can speak to there. I like that we've talked about it in our meetings here about possibly making a statement or writing a letter to ASPPB. Dr. Grothies also suggested that. Daryl's got his hand raised. Daryl?
I was just going to bring up one point to Dr. Singh's question. Dr. Singh, even if we polled or we reached out to the other boards in those jurisdictions that have adopted it, to achieve the level of candor that you're looking for, to really get at the information, it's going to need, that's going to be something you're going to have to do, like a Chair Blimwitz, or one of you guys are going to have to reach out on a kind of a one-on-one level to get kind of the level of candor I think you're looking for. But two, more importantly, I think what you're going to find is, if you're looking for information on the exam, how did your candidates fare? That stuff is going to be housed at ASPPB. So you're going to run into the same situation like what Dr. Becker and Dr. Lambden have been pointed to, is that they don't have the data that hasn't been produced to them. So I don't think you can kind of I'm not saying you suggested this, but I don't think you can do like an end run and just go directly to the states and get that kind of data, because it's going to be housed at ASPPB. Probably the only thing we could get from the states through open records type laws maybe would be, out of the candidates who've taken it, what percentage have passed and what have failed.
Yeah.
I don't know what you can do with that then. Maybe there's something you data nerds can tell me that you could do with that, but I don't know what to do with that.
That may give at least a little bit some argument in favor or against whether how it's working for them. But still, I mean, I feel like that nothing has changed since we first started discussing about it.
You're
No,
exactly right, Dr. Singh.
yeah, and no progress has been made on their part or on our part, and we're in a stalemate, and we can't continue being that for very long, I think. So if they're not going to do anything, then we have to do something. We have to collect our own information and to make our own arguments. It may not be, the kind of data that, we need, but it will give us some kind of basis for the argument, whether which we can say, okay, this is what we know, what's happening with the other states, and we don't want to deal with this problem that way, or I don't know what we find. Sometimes the problems that we anticipate don't ever happen. Other times what we didn't anticipate happens. So we're assuming a lot, and we don't have any basis to make any decision, or it's almost like we're in a position of no win. We got to get something on our side, whether even if it's not very much data, but 3 states are using it. That's a place to start. To us, maybe our chair has to reach their chair and find out what's happening in their book, with their exams. Just something to have something to talk about.
I think Dr. Singh makes a really, oh, sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
I was going to say, I will say for the public's sake, I know those of us that have been involved in these discussions, like Dr. Becker, Dr. Lambden, Chair Blamowitz, myself, we're all kind of aware of the work that has gone into vetting this issue. But I know from the public's perspective, it may look like, oh gosh, they're talking about this again, and nothing has changed. Part of the problem, and I want the public to know, part of the problem with this issue is it's a big wall, and I know you feel like we're talking about the same thing over and over again. We're really not, because in between these meetings, Chair Blamowitz, Dr. Becker, Dr. Lambden, myself, we're all kind of feeling this wall to see where the edges, where the ridges are, if there's any kind of an opening where we can get, a finger of discussion inserted into that wall. So my point is, I don't want the public thinking that we're just not doing anything and that just every quarter we come back, or every triennium we come back and talk about this thing, because I mean, we're having a lot of talks. There is a lot of, I would say, just kind of brainstorming going on between myself and the board members, themselves individually, and with others outside of the board, outside of the state, other affected parties, I'll say. We're really trying to figure out a solution to this, folks. The problem is, it's not solely within our control here, but we recognize it's a high stakes. I just don't want the public thinking that, oh, they're just talking about the same thing over and over again, rehashing it. We're trying to find the edges of this wall and see if there is a solution, if we can. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to say. I did a poor job of saying that.
Mr. Spinks, you have done good job of explaining this, and this helps me, and I'm sure it'll help the public. What you have said.
I think to your point, though, Dr. Singh, is you're talking about action. And I think you guys are both right, which is we've done a good job of talking about the issues, but not necessarily a great job of clearly outlining what the action steps are for the public in this forum. And so I think on the back end, those of us that have been involved with ASPPB, Dr. Lambden and I in particular, who have attended the last 2 meetings as the psychologist attendees, have spent a lot of time talking to different states and making relationships with different states and connecting with those folks and trying to understand what's working and not working on their states. And what's happening in a lot of places is that we are all sort of sorting through the information and understanding all of this stuff from the regulatory side. And I will speak for myself. I won't speak for Dr. Lambden. Some of this has been sorting through what are folks' feelings about this, and then what are the true regulatory issues that we can stand behind and own. And to that end, what's becoming very clear is people are having a really hard time from the state level being the first person to pull the trigger. Everybody is waiting for some other state to jump at ASPPB so that somebody can start dogpiling on and not be the first state to jump. Because I think that folks have to realize that this has the potential to I don't want to say this out loud on a recorded line, but yes, we'll just say it. This could be a class action lawsuit. This could go in a lot of different ways. And nobody wants to be the state that jumps, and nobody wants to be the first person out there. And that's really scary for a lot of states to say. And so there's a lot of that positioning going on in this. And that's what folks are talking about. So there's a lot of positioning in this for states, for organizations to understand. So you guys have to be real honest with us. And Dr. saying that is part of this, is that nobody wants to be the first person sticking their neck out with ASPPB. This is a David and Goliath situation. Everybody is being held up against. 50 states plus Canada have adopted EPPP. They know that they are in the strong position, and they are holding that over folks' heads because they could really stranglehold us on this. And so everybody is trying to position and figure that out. And it's really a challenge for folks to figure that. So from an action standpoint, we have to figure out what are the regulatory things that we can stand behind, and how do we open up that line of discussion and talk about things from a meaningful way and try and produce action.
You're talking about opening a line with ASPPB?
Well, and even with our own constituents. So I really like that idea of having TPA come and talk to us, and maybe our other psychological organizations, because I think we are all talking about this, to your point, but I would like to hear what our other psychological associations, we have asked for public comment on this, but maybe we need to have a listening session and really hear what our constituents are thinking and feeling and hearing about this. Maybe we have some constituents out there who have a better understanding and have seen and have contributed to EPPP2 development, and can really inform us better as we get into some of these discussions. I want to hear from those folks. So I invite folks to contact me, to contact you, John, to contact Mr. Spinks, and to let us know what they're thinking. And maybe we need to set up a board listen and lunch. What do we call those, Brenda? A learn and lunch between now and April, and specifically on EPPP. EPPP2, to your point, Dr. Singh, and hear what our constituents want us to bring to ASPPB and challenge them on when it comes to the data. I want to know. I don't want to be doing this by myself anymore, because I've been spinning my wheels for a year trying to get other states to talk about this with us, to get other organizations to talk about this with us. So let's get to the table.
So my email address is john.belamowitz@bhec.texas.gov. If I get anything, I'm going to forward it to you.
Fine.
I'm happy to put that out there on the record. You can also go through the public comment section of our website. Let's put it. We can decide.
I think.
Hang on just a second. We can decide to put this on the agenda for next meeting. It will be on the agenda for the next meeting.
And I will put myself out there for that lunch session.
Okay. The other thing that was suggested by Dr. Grothuse, and high five to her and TPA for this suggestion.
Mhm.
We've talked about it, a letter.
Mhm.
Without objection, I want to ask staff to help draft the bones of the letter that we can amend as needed next meeting to hopefully get all of our signatures on it.
I was just going to ask,
Go ahead.
in that light and with the action light, I don't want to assume that we've reached a consensus among each of our members of what we feel. A lot of people have voiced concerns. They seem similar in nature. And I don't mean to create kind of a groupthink situation where we assume everybody's under the same view as us. If that is the case, then, which I feel it is, but I don't make assumptions, but we do need to find out if anybody, like Dr. Calhoun is not here. We don't know what she thinks, but I think a letter is appropriate, like, from all of us, detailing our concerns. And, you talked about it, David and Goliath kind of feel it is. I mean, we are the state of Texas also. So like, I don't feel like we're David here, waiting for the first state to kind of do something. I think if any state was going to start the trend, it would be a state like Texas, like so. But all we want to do, we're not trying to create animosity or kind of create a sense of like an adversarial relationship. It's we will sign the letter, we will talk about what it says, but for the reasons that were stated, and these are legitimate, well thought out reasons, we will line them out and say, we are not against the EPP in principle. However, and we can use any language we want, but the fact of the matter is that, we will not adopt it at the current state, and we need to collaborate more with you. And this is our position. And, in action and kind of like, and maybe after we send that letter, it'll become easier for other states to do that. And I think that'd be a noble, charge to take, with really not knowing what other states will respond.
And to ASPPB's credit, I will tell you that the tenor of the conversations that I've had, without exception, has been open. They have listened. I feel like I understand their position. I feel like they understand our problems. It's just, we're still at a stalemate.
Right.
So, but to their credit, it's been the dialogue has been positive. We just haven't gotten anywhere.
Right. And we talked about positive dialogue. Everybody's listening to each other, but at the end of the day, they still say we are. So that's what has to change. Like that's what has to change.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. You've been very right. We've had good discussions.
Yes.
However, we need to move beyond this.
I've had good discussions with my 10-year-old about dogs lately. And the answer right now is we're not getting another dog. And I'm very kind and polite about that, but my position is not changing.
Okay.
So that I can say that we've had a good conversation. It just hasn't moved. Daryl's got his hand.
That's you and your
Sorry.
son.
Yes.
And we are not the son of ASPPB.
That's right. That's right.
So we deserve more respect.
That's
than
right.
That analogy though, that was solid.
Daryl.
Oh, is there any way we get to see some sample questions? So I personally would not, I don't know if
Dr. Becker.
You can do that online, Dr. Singh.
you can? Okay.
Daryl, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say, y'all were talking about a letter, which we'll be happy to get you started on that. One thing I just wanted to point out, just something to think about when in deciding whether you want to send a letter out. I recognize our meetings are broadcast publicly, they're recorded, they're put on YouTube. So in a large sense, this discussion, kind of the sentiment, has been preserved in the public forum forever in that sense. But there's something different about committing something like that to a letter that is more easily circulated and tends to circulate a little bit more than, say, what a video, a recorded board meeting on YouTube will. You can just tell from our viewership. Not a lot of people circulate. It doesn't go viral. I'll just say that. I think the chances of a letter circulating, through a greater number of people are going to be higher. So the only reason I say that is because whatever we put in that letter, I think is going to have, it's going to be more readily used. And remember this, while this to us is a regulatory issue, once you throw something like that out there, it can be brought into the strictly political arena. So I'm hoping y'all are reading between the lines on what I'm saying. It's just something that we need to think about in deciding whether we want to do a letter. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I just want to make sure that the board is aware that once you sign that, you put it out there. We've kind of been viewing this as an issue where we discuss it kind of internally within the profession, within the board. And then we've been dealing with ASPPB directly. Once you do this, if that letter makes it out into the political arena and becomes a political issue for somebody, we can lose the I don't know how you would say the privity of it kind of being an in-house issue. it can turn it, we can get drug into a different arena is what I'm trying to say. So
Daryl, I'm glad you bring that up. And I think that just for everyone's edification here, I've made every effort to, over the past months, have conversations so that it didn't need to be a publicly issued letter to them. I don't know what else to do at this point.
I think the letter is not laying out all of our specific concerns
I agree.
about this, because that's not where I want to have
That's a
this
book,
argument.
probably.
And it could be, but I don't, but to Daryl's point, like that isn't how I want to lay this out. I think the letter is really, it is the request to debate this publicly
agree.
and to bring it to a forum where every state can have a regulatory conversation about what the impact is on implementation and our ability to enact this.
So I'm glad you're laying this out because it's going to inform. And that's also why I want staff to write, because I'd probably write something a little too edgy or fiery. So with the timeline though, we have another meeting. What I say in
April,
early April. Is that right? April
8th.
11.
Okay.
Is it 11?
The mid-year conference is April 25th. So
Yeah.
the timing for the idea and ethos of this letter to be requesting more dialogue
Yeah.
ahead of that meeting would be very well timed.
Because I also, with a nod towards whom we serve, it is our entire legislature. And I don't want this to be viewed as limiting mental health in our state or opening the door for unqualified people to practice in our state. This move is really towards neither of those things. It's towards preserving the sanctity of this licensure in a meaningful way that makes sense.
Yes.
And we are trying to protect the public and have a meaningful exam. And we should be able to do that with an organization that is working with us. So I think we are just trying to debate what we are being asked to do at a national level. And that's the conversation that we want to have.
Well, and I was
Go
going
ahead, Ryan.
to say, tacking on to that, I mean, at its core, it's just a request to be partners on this and
Yes.
be a partner in the conversation, because the view right now, it seems like, is that they've already decided the outcome and we're just going through the motions to get to that outcome.
Pushing it away.
Yeah. And so I think the request to just be partners in this and to have the ability to even have a conversation, I don't think that's an offensive request personally. I think that's it shouldn't, well, yeah, it shouldn't be, but it's, I think that's perfectly reasonable, especially considering our role as a regulatory body, right?
I guess my concern is, maybe I, thinking too much ahead and complicating it, but, in the past with your individual conversations, they've been cordial, they've listened appropriately. At the end of it, sorry, our position remains the same. I'm just concerned that will just give another opportunity to do the same thing. Even the more dialogue we have, so, and I kind of maybe, an emphasis on, maybe you're right, like that's not the way to go. That's not the, I guess what I really want out of it is actually like, openness to being flexible, an openness to adjusting, an openness to
On their part or our part?
their part,
Yeah.
to changing, to to looking into like, step away from our position remains the same, and just put that aside. And what are you willing to do to make the change? Because that's that's the whole point, and that's what we need to see, because discussions, they're really good at listening.
Yeah.
But yeah, we won't know unless we try. So,
Exactly right.
so I mean,
This
I-
has been, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, jump in.
I would like to, I echo what all of you are saying in support. I think we need to get this process moving down the pike, and, but it's important how we do it, to communicate to them that individually, several concerns individually have been raised And so the process now is to raise it to the level of the group, and issue an invitation for whomever wishes to come and help us understand why the move and the push really to implement something that isn't efficacious and hasn't been proven to be efficacious at its core. The other issue also, I believe that it would be helpful to invite as well Dr. Song to come as well and be part of that discussion, because psychometrically she would be the one to answer our questions about the efficacy of the exam.
Sounds good. We can issue that invitation. It's going to be on the agenda next meeting. This has been a great conversation.
I was just going to ask you,
Yes,
do we
sir.
need any motions or anything?
I don't, Daryl, do you need a motion for any of this? Because we're not deciding, there's nothing that's been
No,
decided.
no motions. We're not taking any action. I will tell you all, this is incredibly helpful to me. I really like to see these types of discussions, especially on an issue as big as this. This is well done is all I would say. This is incredibly helpful to me.
We've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. Do y'all want to take a 5-minute break and then we power
Sure.
through the rest of this? Does that sound good? Without objection, we're going to adjourn for, it's 11:10. We'll come back at 11:15.
Okay, let's not.
All right. It is 11:18. We're back in session. Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists. And we're going to go into the agenda item number 4, the Board Administrators Report.
Hello, all. Diane Moore. The first thing on here, I just want to recognize that our 3 board members were reappointed to the board. Mr. Herman Adler, Mr. Ryan Bridges, and Mr. Adani Zaguras. And their new terms will expire October 31st, 2029.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yes. And our board measures reports are in the meeting book for your review. Just standard reporting. Under SIPAC, it continues to grow. There are 33 jurisdictions enacted and I believe 39 that over the end of the year that will be fully enacted. There are 858 Texans that are licensed under this telepsychology license under the SIPAC, and 55 that are licensed using a temporary license to practice within another state for 30 days. Okay. So for the ASBPP update, Dr. Lambden and I attended the annual conference that was in Cleveland, Ohio last October. And some of the highlights of that meeting, there was discussion on diversity, equity, and conclusion as it relates to our licensure applications. So we had in-depth exercises at our tables of looking at our applications and determining if there's any implicit bias questions that are within our applications. Our applications were in pretty good shape. The only minor tweak that we recommended to our licensure team was just to make the testing accommodation questions more consistent across the LPA and the LP applications. And one of the other segments, I wanted to commend Attorney Patrick Hyde for facilitating the mock hearing at the conference. It was very interactive exercise. It was nice to see how other boards looked at disciplinary actions based on some of the details of the case that was presented. Yeah. So the next ASPPB mid-year meeting will be in Boston, Massachusetts. It'll be from April 25th to the 28th. And their annual meeting, which will be in Dallas, Texas, it'll be October 30th to November 3rd of next year. So since our board would not be meeting again until April 11th, we would need volunteers who would represent our agency at the mid-year meeting for April 25th to 28th.
I would go, but I am not available. I'm gonna be at a different conference that I'm presenting at that same time.
Diane, where is that meeting at?
It'll be in Boston.
Oh, Boston. Okay. I was thinking they were going to have it in Canada.
No, according to the information that's in there.
Okay.
If we are going to petition to hear the issue of EPPP2, I think it's going to be very important to have a psychologist at that meeting.
We send 2 people there? No?
We send one board member and the staff member.
It's unfortunate because I would like to go.
I can look into see. I would need to look at my schedule and everything just to look at that. But if it can work for me, I'd be willing to do it. I know I'm going to be representing in Dallas as well at the annual. So
There's no, for Dallas, there's no prohibition on, especially if we live there, it's just the travel budget that's the issue, correct? And making sure that there's not a quorum.
Yeah, the travel budget is, we budget for one professional and one staff member, so Dallas shouldn't be as big
It'll
of
be
an
cheap
issue.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't need the travel budget. I'll be attending Dallas at for some portion of it for sure. Any motions?
Saying you're willing to go?
If I can make, I just haven't looked at all like at my schedule or anything like that. But I'm gonna throw it out there that I will.
You could make a motion, and if
I motion for Dr. Cartwright to attend pending his availability on his schedule.
would you, if that's not the case, would you amend that to potentially allow the chair to substitute if he's unavailable?
Sure.
The chair to appoint a substitute.
So noted.
Okay. Because you've heard the motion.
I second the motion.
And seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I,
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
I have one more thing under my section. So the APA Commission on Accreditation is in their 3rd phase of their accreditation planning for their timeline that they projected. So they are having a webinar or a town forum tomorrow. I believe we sent that out. So tomorrow they are having an update on the master's accreditation update and brief overview and the key points for the programs. So in their 3rd phase, they're working on development of practices for accreditation review, the implementing regulations with public comment periods, and implementation of initial accreditation review. And all that information is on the accreditation website for APA. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. That moves us to item number 5, selection of TSBEP council member to BHEC public member. That's me. I would say that I would be humbled and honored if you guys had faith in me to continue in that role, but I will leave it up to the will of the board for nominations or any alternatives.
I nominate our chair, John Glenwood, to continue serving as the BHEC public member from this board.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Thank you very much for y'all's confidence. Did we not, moving on to enforcement, I guess we'll talk about ISCs in a second. So I'll turn it over to the ED and staff. Talk about dismissals. Or to field any questions if there are any.
No, you are.
go.
And now, okay. Questions?
Hearing none. Do we have any status reports to go over before I get on to ISCs?
No, sir.
Did we not talk about ISCs doing them more ad hoc, or are we still scheduling them?
I was hoping to have that discussion of what y'all wanted and what I wanted to move towards.
What do you want to move towards?
Right now, I would like one day of the week. Right now, the current panel, we're doing Thursdays, if that works for the next group. And my idea was, instead of doing them as a giant block like we've done traditionally, I just knock out one or two a week if there are. And if I come to a situation where on a given day, one member of the three in that level is not available, I could move down the list and possibly call someone else who qualifies for that position, whether it be PhD, master's, or the public member.
Cool.
Are they in person or are they Zoom?
We're going to stay with Zoom.
Okay.
So do you need a motion on this to change, just to change how you select them, or do you just need a consensus from the board?
Just consensus.
I see no reason why that's a problem, because you're going to be getting who's available and who's probably most well qualified for whatever disciplinary matter you're dealing with, I would imagine.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask like two more questions? So you're going with Thursdays, but is it a block of time or is it a scheduled like?
Right now, the current group that for that quarter, Thursday morning from 8 to 10 is the time that was available. I can be flexible in that, but I was just sort of hoping to move towards instead of a block, one day of the week when y'all in your varied schedules, y'all are all leading very professional lives,
Right.
when a day, a time for a couple of hours to knock out one or two cases. It doesn't have to be Thursday meeting. I work Monday through Friday.
It'll
No,
be
that's
ad hoc,
fine. I would
fluid.
just need to know in advance to sort of tentatively put the chunk in
Yeah.
my schedule.
Voted upon, or
Yeah.
there's.
Yeah, if I may, I'm on this next grouping of them that starts, I guess, next Thursday. And for, at least for my schedule, it's super, super convenient to have 8 to 10 blocked out. But it was a conversation that was had via email before that about what worked for everyone. So if I could just say, I'm a big fan of the way we're doing this now versus how we did when I started. And
When we had to come down to Austin.
for 2 days.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was,
Yeah, this is-
I remember there was one board meeting. I was literally in Austin for 3.5 days, 4 days. It was
Yeah.
3 nights. And it was
because you do the ISCs for
Yeah.
Tuesday and Wednesday.
a
And
big
then,
board meeting. It was brutal.
Yeah.
so
I'm game. I think
yeah.
that makes perfect sense.
Without objection, you proceed.
Yes, sir. Thanks,
Thank you
sir.
very much.
Thank you.
Dismissals for board ratification. Need a motion to approve the dismissals as you put them out there. Is that correct?
No.
No.
I don't believe there are
Okay,
any
never mind.
dismissals for board ratification.
Mhm.
All right, moving on. Do we have agreed orders? Hang on.
I did not see any.
We had 2 in our packet.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay.
Here we go.
Yeah, they were already approved.
So we don't need action on this.
No, there's no action needed, but the ones that were reviewed, there were 2 for Dr. Shannon McShay, Hyphen-Tero, and a Frederick Hodges.
Gotcha. And they were already agreed.
Right.
That's, I guess, point of information for us.
They were approved by the executive director.
Very good. All right. Moving on to committee reports, we've got the applications committee has a denial that we're working on. Is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
I'm getting it pulled up here, so.
There's a denial appeal for LPA applicant Parks.
Yeah, so this is an international applicant with education. From what country?
Ukraine?
The Ukraine?
From Ukraine. And I recall the issue was problem with supervision.
Psychiatry.
Yeah, it was a psychiatrist. But I think part of it is the terminology in the country of like, I guess after you've been practicing for 5 years that you can, so again, it gets into kind of muddied water there.
So I remember I'm looking at my email to Miss Moore about when it came to me on the committee. So the supervisor was not a licensed psychologist, and she said she only supervised the applicant for 2 months, December 1st, 2017 to February 1st, 2018. You have, so there's two problems there. Not a psychologist and only supervised for 2 months. Which if we're talking about an internship or practicum, it has to be over the course of 2 semesters.
So practically speaking, looking at the notice of the denial here, do we have a specific bulleted, or can somebody lay out for us the specific deficiencies that are we talking about something that can beyond remediation, or?
Do you want me to answer that, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
yes.
Yeah,
anybody.
so
Yes.
463.8 A2 is the requirement that for LPA licensure that they have 6 semester credit hours of supervised experience by a licensed psychologist. And we also amended that recently for LSS supervision from an LSSP as well. So the deficiencies that she doesn't meet that. The question is that it wasn't by an LP, a licensed psychologist, or an LSSP. And the other issue is was it for 6 semester credit hours? So we do have the remediation part in subsection G for an incomplete licensure. And so based on that being her only deficiency on the application, if you agree with staff that she is deficient for that, there is the ability in the rule. You can either approve, deny, find that she does actually meet it and that staff got it wrong, just outright deny her, or the third, you can go with the remediation plan. And that is an option under this particular applicant in this rule.
Perfect. This is where as a public member, I really lean on the professional members to help guide our discussion here, because I just don't know the implications.
Yeah, if you look at the LPA application checklist on page 6 of the where it says redacted, it has the so it is quite messy, and coursework seems to be in line according to the staff.
Okay, I have a question because I am a little bit confused. The FCSA report, that is the one where the foreign applicant submits their credentials,
Right.
and that's an independent body that tells us what the equivalent credential is, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
That says that her credential is equivalent to a master's degree.
It's
In clinical psychology.
And that sort of got me stuck on her application.
She's an
LPA.
LPA applicant.
Oh, she's an LPA
LPA, yeah,
applicant.
exactly.
Oh, okay,
Right.
sorry. That's why I got so confused. Okay. That's where I got lost, guys. Thank you.
Yes. So,
All right.
so with that, it's not, I mean, it's not a, it seems like a pretty minute detail. If the coursework checks the box. Sorry, go ahead.
Do we want to see if Ms. Park is in attendance
Yes,
and give her an
thank you.
opportunity to
Thank
speak?
you.
If she could raise her hand,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
Ms. Park, if you're out there listening on the Zoom function, can you raise your hand? I don't have the dashboard here, so nothing.
She's not in
I
attendance.
don't see anybody by that name in attendance.
Okay.
So I think
Thank you for stopping us there. Go ahead.
with the coursework, it does say, but I don't think it's sensitive enough to know like about the practicum internship aspects of the degree that, there's equivalency in that area. So that's what we are being, that's what seems to be inconsistent. And if she can remediate, then I'm all for that, but that's what is the issue of why it was denied.
So if we were to consider a remediation plan, what would that look like?
Well,
that's
That's the question.
yeah, that's the question. So I think
I don't, she can't, acquire the supervision in an academic setting. I assume you can't just, join a program just for like 6 credit hours. Right. So I don't know. This might have never come up before where we had to, for an LPA.
I can say I've never seen a Ukrainian application. So,
But I think this is to the point where if you think that she has prior experience in a somewhat equivalent setting that is unusual, that would make her an appropriate candidate, and we want to give her the experience that is equivalent, is there an opportunity to provide her with appropriate supervision to determine that she is competent to provide the services that are
So
appropriate?
I'm wondering if we do remediation, could we allow private practice situation to Frankenstein this portion of that's I think the only shot she has.
like working under
Yeah.
working under an LP for, let's say, whatever would make that equivalent, and being signed off and having.
I'm gonna let Daryl chime in here. He might have something for us.
And looking at her transcript, she's got neuropsych and practicum for, it looks like 2 semester credit hours, and then pre-graduation practice and master's thesis defense. I'm looking on page 15 of that PDF, the Park LPA denial PDF. 15. Those total up to 6. Are those, Patrick, are those not I'm assuming those staff looked at and they decided they don't qualify as the 6 semester credit hours.
Yeah, as far as I know, there wasn't anything, they were asked to sign off on have a psychologist sign off on it. And that's one of the bigger issues is we don't know that there was supervision by a psychologist.
Right.
Part of her explanation is that the way that they do licensure in Ukraine for psychology is they don't do licensure for psychology. So
Yeah.
that it almost was, I think, something that's not possible necessarily for her to have a licensed psychologist sign off on it because their licensure system is not the same as ours. So I think we have a particular issue with that. In that, I think the issue is that we don't have a licensed psychologist able to sign off on it.
Okay.
Do those meet it? I don't remember exactly which courses were, but that was a big issue. The other thing though, I wanted to say, if I can real quickly, is since it's an LPA application, she's going to have to be supervised for a minimum of 3,000 hours by a licensed psychologist before she can practice independently. So if she does get the license, she will have to be under supervision of a licensed psychologist.
So
What do you guys
what I always oh, sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
I'm gonna say, even now, that's, you guys have the authority under like an eligibility order or a remediation order. You could extend that too if you wanted to. So I don't want you thinking that's a cap.
Right.
You got some flexibility here under that remediation language.
What I always recoil from is when you get an applicant from anywhere here or overseas trying to like jump into a different profession or squeeze a round peg or square peg in a round hole. This to me looks like this is the most logical. If she's coming over here, which license am I going for that most comports with what I've been doing? It's this one.
And the problem is we just wanted her, I would like to talk to her,
Yeah, I wish she was here
Yeah.
too.
and she could just be here like that. That would help us a lot,
Yeah.
but without talking to her, getting some more details about her experiences and what it was about. Was she invited? Did we-
Yes. Mhm.
So
I'm sure y'all said this. I'll just say it here just for staff certification. Anytime we do this, like, please just tell them you probably do, like how helpful it is for them to be here for this.
it could make a difference between,
Yeah.
So from a remediation standpoint, giving this candidate every opportunity, is there, and I'm looking at Mr. Zagoras and Mr. Adler, like, is there any opportunity for this young woman to do like some type of eligibility exam? Is there any way for her to demonstrate competency with which we could assure that she has the skills necessary to move into that supervised practice?
So you're saying that,
question.
that before she's allowed to be supervised to complete, you know, a replacement of the 6 hours of practicum to give her an exam?
Yeah, just, or something where, I mean, like you're saying, it'd be nice to talk to her, like, since she's not here to speak for herself, is there a way to just say, can you do something or sit down with someone and demonstrate that you meet
What does that
whatever
mean?
minimum
Does that mean
competency?
like a
I
conversation?
don't know.
Like, you know,
I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. Like, what
it's
is?
unheard of.
Well, I would have liked to seen like maybe a resume of some kind. What was she doing? She might, and again, the reason we having a problem, because she's not here to defend
Yeah.
herself, to provide information. She may have experience working in the clinical setting. We don't have record of it.
But I think that in terms of like a vetting kind of, you know, and, you know, I just don't think it's fair to do anything like informal or kind of, you know, just kind of drawn up, you know, kind of in some way.
So it's not that she didn't have the supervision. It's that she didn't have a supervision by a psychologist.
Was it
because
long
did-
enough? I
Because
mean-
it didn't. Well, hang on. Was it long enough if the psychiatrist was
2 months.
It's not long enough.
It's not long enough, but also, so in this country, psychiatrists don't administer testing.
right? I know.
So, I mean, it's also that they wouldn't be doing the thing that she's going to be doing.
Right. Patrick, you were gonna say something.
To Dr. Becker's question, though, this is to get approval to sit for the EPPP. So she's going to have to take and pass the EPPP at the 500.
Oh,
score.
okay.
We're not
Well,
giving
there
her
you go.
license. yet.
So
Okay.
this is not an automatic
Right.
license. This is
This
approval to
application
sit for the
to take the
exam.
exam.
Okay.
I don't.
So-
I don't see any reason to hold this up.
No,
I don't
and
think
she's
so.
going to be doing supervised practice. So I don't,
3,000 hours, right?
yeah. I don't.
So just waive that requirement, or
There's
just
still
kind of-
so many hurdles that have to be cleared. Like,
Well, I mean, you obviously can take whatever course you want, but you could just say she would need to do an additional 100 hours beyond, or 200 hours beyond the 3,000 hours of the 3,000 hours of supervised experience to make up for the lacking. The issue is I don't know that we want to say we're waiving it, because the whole point of the remediation plan is we're not necessarily waiving the requirements. The requirements are the same. We can recognize some of the supervision that she did, but it doesn't necessarily meet the letter of the rule, right? So there might be worth saying, doing it, I don't know, or additional continuing education, whatever. You have all the tools. There's not like one, you have to do one particular option, but you could say, do extra continuing professional development, or do additional supervised hours just to make up for this deficiency. Because it's, as far as we can tell, she got supervision. It just wasn't necessarily under the right person. But we've had to deny people when they had an LPC supervise them instead of a psychologist, or they had, you know, the wrong license type. And in this instance, she didn't really have the opportunity to have a psychologist
no fault of
supervise.
her own.
Yeah.
But remember, we're talking about like just the ability to take, like, this is a requirement to take the exam. So if we just added some more hours on top of 3,000, the person who starts a 3,000-hour process has the LPC, you know, dependent practice license, right? Like,
Once
is that you are licensed as an LPA at that point.
hang on, Daryl, do you have something for this?
Yeah, remember the 6 semester credit hours of supervised experience under an LP, that was that evolved out of a 450-hour postgraduate period of supervision under an LP before we made this change. And the reason we did that is because we wanted it more structured in a training program and not kind of the loosey-goosey stuff we were seeing in practice settings. So if you're going to remediate, a possible solution, what I would throw out there is say, before you can apply for independent practice, make her do 3,450 hours, because we know the 6 has kind of been determined by prior boards to be the equivalent of the 450 hours of postgraduate supervised experience we used to have. So just make her do 3,450 of hours supervised experience, and then she will have roughly the same amount of supervised experience had she undergone 6 semester credit hours and the 3,000 hours of post licensure practice as an LPA under supervision. That's a solution.
What do you
That would be a remediation.
Requirement, table that requirement, let her take the exam as is. What, assuming she passes, she becomes an LPA, and then she can start the process of getting those hours.
Well, it'd be an eligibility order. She would have to agree to that before we would let her do it. We would say, look, as long as you promise that you'll do at least 3,450 hours of supervised experience before you apply for independent practice, if you so ever choose to do so, then you can go ahead, you're approved to sit for the exam and go forward.
And
There has to be an eligibility order here.
And I think, she passed the EPPP Part 1. That's indicate that's a validation, I guess, in some ways of her experience or like her education. So I have no problem with that in principle.
Okay. I like this solution that Mr. Spinks has suggested. Can we just move on this one?
You make a motion.
Yeah, I make motion on accepting.
Hold on. Dr. Singh, we got to have your camera on before you can take any action.
Oh.
You're not actually here, Dr. Singh, until we see your face.
There
Now
you go.
I did not know. I did not
It's
know the
okay.
camera was off.
It's okay. Okay, go ahead and make your motion.
Yes, I like to make the motion that the 3,450 hours, say the whole thing, Mr. Spinks, for me.
Propose an eligibility order to the applicant whereby she agrees to undertaking 3,450 hours before she would be eligible for independent practice.
Yes.
One question. Does the
upon
board
licensure as an
feel that we
LPA?
need to speak start before we adopt this motion? Are we okay without just getting a kind of a sense of, what she has?
I would have preferred her to be here. Based on this, I'm okay with it.
Yes. I've looked at her application carefully and studied with all the material that was submitted to the package. And I think this is a very good solution for her.
Okay, y'all have heard the motion?
Yeah, I second the motion.
Been seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Say no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. Rulemaking. Actually, hang on real quick. We don't have anything from compliance, jurisprudence, or rules committees, correct?
Just a quick question with the
Yes, ma'am.
jurisprudence. We did implement the new the format with the domains, and the exam is broken down into those categories. That started November 1st. So in February of this year, we'll get reporting on how people are scoring under the new format. And we'll be able to look at that at the April meeting. But the next phase of this is to add more questions to the domain areas. So it did come up in conversation. I guess in the past, there was an exam writing committee. And we're not sure or clear if that's how you want us to move forward to create an exam writing committee to help write new exam jurisprudence questions for the test. I just wanted your feedback on that.
We
So the
probably
question-
need one. We probably need one of those. It used to come at the oral exam. Sorry, go ahead.
So the question is that we have a jurisprudence exam, but we're asking about making changes to it or making updated questions.
Yeah, we want more of a bank of questions because right now every question we have is. They are being more randomized now, but we need a larger pool to pull from.
Refresh
So it's just a percentage of
Refresh
each
and
domain.
rotation. And so they essentially, I don't know if I'm sure that the questions are out there somewhere, but
Are they wanting to create new content, like new content?
New exam questions, yeah.
Yes,
It's
as I
all based off
understand it.
Laws and rules and the statutes, and most of them are on the administrative rules for us and some of the other Texas codes that we reference. So the question is, do we need a exam writing committee just for jurisprudence? Or is it something that just the jurisprudence committee themselves would work on creating those extra bank of questions?
Who's on the jurisprudence committee?
I am.
Mr. Singh and Mr. Bridges, I believe.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to throw out. Like, I am not qualified to write
Yeah.
questions, so I
Um,
would almost argue
it
for a
would,
separate.
yeah, it would have to be like an exam.
I reframed lots of questions on the jurisprudence exam. And my effort was to make them more clear and not in any way tricky. And there were some that had some issues. So we worked very hard and changed a lot of questions. And I don't mind making more questions, but this is an open book kind of exam. So, and they have 14 days to complete it.
Yes,
And-
once they are registered for it, they have 14
Yeah.
days.
And to me, this exam should not be at all difficult. Now, if a person, if anybody fails, I feel like they just missed out on something in their training or studying, because I went through every question and I feel like they were very good questions, and their difficulty level was mediocre, medium level, and to actually low to medium. And they weren't very difficult questions. And so I think making some more questions won't be a difficult problem, but I don't know with the open book exams and stuff, whether you need a bigger pool.
Let's can we put this on the agenda for the next meeting and we can have like a bigger discussion about that?
Sure.
Can I make just a quick comment?
You bet.
So Ms. Moore, I think what you're saying is you would like, and I agree with you would like more of a bank of questions.
Yes.
So that every time the jurisprudence exam is administered, it isn't the same set of questions appearing over and over again. And I
Correct.
think that would add to the strength of the exam as a whole, not trying to trick anybody, but just trying to make it more robust as an exam.
Correct.
Okay.
Cool. Very good. Anything else?
That's all.
Okay, moving on to rules. We have 463.9, the LSSP rule. And this is proposed. It's proposed.
It's adoption.
Adoption. Sorry, I'm reading proposed from. It was proposed from last time, and that's what I'm looking at. This is for adoption. And this will get sent up to BHEC at this point. We've debated this before. Y'all have read the rule. Are there any questions, further debate, comments?
There were a couple of written comments, I think.
Yep, there were some written comments. Are there any you wanted to highlight or go over?
Well, yes, if I can find it, I think it was the, let me try to find it real quick. Well, essentially, I guess it was the comment on the particular word being program, which is the old wording of the rule, and then course.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. And so I think what the wording of it, the concern is that that a program, it didn't say that, but I think essentially is more comprehensive versus a course.
Right. Does that material, what is the material change effect of that?
It would just be going back to the current language, I think, is essentially right. Dr. Lambden is what you're talking about. It's in what's in 3 in D3, and D3 was broken out into 4 subparts. And so part of what was in D3 was broken out into sub A under 3. And when that was done, the word graduate level program was changed to graduate level training course. So so training program, training course. All it would be doing is going back to the original language before. I don't think it, I mean, Daryl can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's a material change.
It's like, I'm reading that like a training course. We're not talking about a class. We're talking about a course of study through a program. Like course and program seem like synonyms in this usage.
I don't think there was an intent to make it less stringent. I don't think there was an intent to say, oh, we're only talking about one individual course and not, you know, an actual program.
Yeah,
Because
the course of study throughout the program.
Well, and
Right.
I don't think there was an intent, but I think that the public comment was concerned that it would open the door to
Or be
saying, and I don't
misinterpreted.
understand this quite as
Mhm.
well because I don't have an LSSP and I'm not a school psychologist. But I think the concern is that there are some not, and you might understand this better, Dr. Cartwright, that there are some certificate level programs that are truly just courses that might meet that definition that aren't quite as stringent that could open the door for. And I think that's what the concern is.
Aren't-
And I'm missing it. I'm missing the
yeah.
mark on this.
Aren't the certificate programs though? I mean, that's talking about for remediation for somebody who came from something slightly related that needs to go back and is missing something. And that's like what Texas Tech is doing. Is that right? Yeah.
that was drafted specifically.
That's not an end run around anything. That's essentially a structured remediation where you don't have to go back to the start.
It's my
to start a whole new
recollection this was
master's deal.
specifically drafted in response to people from Texas Tech
Yeah.
talking about their program. Yeah.
And that's what when we're talking about that here, that's what we're referring.
Yeah, I mean, it can go back to it. I don't think changing that wording is going to materially change.
That's what I was going to ask. I mean,
Yeah.
if we changed it back to
Training program.
then course,
Yeah.
just strike the course, add program. I mean, I think that would just make everybody more comfortable.
Okay.
I don't think that's a material change.
All right.
I
So
think
is there a
you can see
motion?
that.
Motion to amend?
So moved.
Been moved,
I second it.
seconded, without objection. That's approved. No one objects? Okay. The amendment is on there. Are we ready to move adoption of it? Any further discussion?
I move to adopt.
We move to
I
adopt.
second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you very much. All right. We've done 9 already. Unless there's any recommendations for future agenda items that we haven't already discussed. Hearing none. Staff, Daryl, do you have anything that I'm missing before I adjourn this?
No, sir.
All right.
Sorry, I have one quick comment.
Good job. Thank you for
I
speaking up.
would, thank you. I would like to go back and dovetail a little bit about what we were talking about, the EPPP Part 2 and moving into action.
Yes, ma'am.
So I would like to propose a 2-pronged approach where we issue an invitation for members, or including Dr. Song of ASPPB, to help us understand the implementation of the EPPP Part 2. And then, you know, if that doesn't yield any fruits, I propose that we write just an open letter and you know, after, you know, kind of basically summing up our meeting and our thoughts, and move into action on striking out and reaching out to other states, other jurisdictions that are kind of in the same boat.
Good deal. On the letter, I feel like the conversation that Dr. Becker and I exchanged, we had, the legislature would say, like, let that be reduced to writing and put in the journal. Like, we don't have to do that, but that, I think, summed up the tenor of what we're thinking for this letter. It doesn't need to be our dissertation on why. It's a simply, here's a statement of we're not on the same page, and we have a problem, and we're here to solve it together collaboratively.
Absolutely.
I was going to state too, I really like Dr. Becker's comment about maybe doing an insights for lunch on this topic with our own constituents. I think getting more feedback from folks from TPA, from all the other organizations out there that mean so much to us. I think that'd be a great idea.
Yep.
And so if we can maybe move forward with getting something out to the public on that.
10-4.
Further on the EPPP.
Yes, sir.
We mentioned several of us, show us the data. What data are we looking for here, that we're incompetent? Are we looking that we need this for some reason? I mean, there's got to be a reason why they do an MRI. What are they looking for?
We're looking for reliability, validity. We're looking to understand the test better. We're also looking for what it demonstrates. They show nice, pretty graphs about what is different between EPPP1 and what EPPP2 is measuring, but we don't see the statistics around that and what those values are, and realistically how much they are different and how they are measuring. We're all scientists, so these stats mean something to us. So we're looking for the reliability differences. What's valid about this test, and then break it down for us, because one of the main challenges that has been raised are the DE&I differences, and that in particular, that this could be skewed for someone for whom English is not their first language, or individuals who are not from an advantaged or educationally rich background. So for a state like Texas, where you have a very large rural draw for which we are trying to put mental health providers in those rural areas, that could be of a distinct educational disadvantage to now add a second barrier for which you are then marginalizing those individuals. And they have still not distinctly shown us the early numbers that were put up had some disadvantages. And then ASPPB came out with a report and said, no, that's all wrong. But the data was never provided to us about what that looked like. So we have been asking, psychologists have been asking, show us the data, show us what those
It's not
values
like we're
are.
talking about like a secret government program here that,
No.
that we're not supposed to be aware of, like there's no reason why in an educational, educational setting that any data should be held back, right?
We'd like to think so.
We're scientists, right? So like if there's an implementation, if you don't show all your data, that's academic, that's fraud, right? I mean, that's gonna huge repercussions. So there's nothing protecting them from like, it's need to know basis, like that kind of stuff. So for the sake of, education, they have no right to, I mean, they can, but we can't move forward without,
Mr. Adler, it's my understanding that the data just does not exist, because
Too new.
it's
Well, I don't think we're talking, if you're talking about like the ones from the states that are already adopting it, that data.
well, so in statistics, the larger the sample
Sure,
size,
sure.
the more robust
Right,
your.
right.
When
I think we're talking more about the development of the test, not necessarily what the data, the stats from the current states that are using it. Am I right, Dr. Becker?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. I mean, I think folks have been asking for both. They've been asking for whatever we can get our hands on. And we've just been kind of stonewalled with being provided what ASPPB wants to share that meets the story that they want to tell, which is, in my opinion, and it's just that an opinion, what any organization or business will provide to sell a product.
Well, and to the latter point, I mean, that's a concern I think we brought up multiple times, but just sample size in general of the data, and how vetted that data actually is. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to be able to dive into some of the nuances of it, but I know sample sizes. I know some statistics.
Mhm.
So that's, I mean, like I said earlier, it's kind of a solution in search of a problem, it seems like, without better data. So
Transparency. Just
yeah, that's all it is.
You know, like you can't, nobody's gonna hold it through back.
No.
Well, and again, not to belabor a point and kick the dead horse, but I think this is the challenge that we are bringing to ASPPB and the challenge that we have as a state. We have a legislature that is going to require us to bring a compelling argument for why we are putting in another costly barrier to licensure. And without data to support that we are solving a problem that exists to competency or to practice, we are putting in place a regulatory barrier to practice in our state, for which we are trying to do and have a legislative order in writing to do the exact opposite. And so without a compelling argument, our legislature is not going to ratify this. And so we are going to get stuck in the middle of the crosshairs between a national mandate being pushed by a private organization that has a really strong reach from a professional standpoint and a legislative dictate that puts our state and our constituency in the crosshairs of something that is really unfair to us when we never had the ability to argue it openly about what that means for the practice of psychology in our state. And that is the piece that I take the most issue with as a practicing psychologist.
Absolutely.
In the practical part of that, I've had to go down in front of the legislator and sit before chairman and members of the committee and answer to, when we're asking for our budget and they're like, okay, what are you doing with the money? That, depending on the part of the issue, parts of that can be pretty prickly. If I get called down there to explain this one, like some of y'all are coming with me.
Yeah.
Well, we'll all come with you.
Okay. We got to volunteer.
Yeah.
But that will be,
We'll all, not all, I mean, I will.
okay, good.
I'm going to
The
turn
point
off
is
my
that-
phone that week.
No,
You're gonna sit up front too when you go. I'm gonna sit in the back.
I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah. The point is that will be not fun. That will be, and we won't have good answers.
But that's my point.
Yeah, it's great. It's
is
perfect.
that if I had a compelling argument to make,
Right.
and I'm going to stand in front of my state legislature, I have to make a compelling argument based on science and data that allows me to stand up in front of my legislature and make an argument that makes sense.
Confidently.
And confidently, okay? Because I can stand here and look at all of you and say, I have not been given a compelling argument to argue this, either with constituents, with any of you, or for public safety. I can't get there right now.
Yeah. And I was going to just
go
say, from
for
a
it.
public safety perspective too, I mean, there's no way of knowing whether this exam was helpful or not, unless essentially someone gets licensed and then fails the public, does something wrong, harms the public. I mean, that's like kind of outside of the whole parameters of the test construction and everything else. So it's really kind of hard to pull data anyway. I think that's kind of where we come back to when there wasn't an exam or, a part two or an oral. Did things get worse or did they not? We don't really know. The only way we know is when things do go wrong kind of after all of this. So it's just another point to think about. And it's very hard to come up with that kind of data in general, I think.
Well, what you're talking about really, in essence, is predictive validity, and that takes time, in essence, to acquire, to see. And my understanding is we don't have, in terms of the numbers, I don't think, my understanding is psychologists really get in trouble a whole lot, disciplinary wise, in terms of, to begin with. And so we go back to the point. I'm okay with implementing something to measure skills. That's okay. But we need to make sure that what we utilize is efficacious in doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're just trying to be responsible as we can. I mean, there's no, that's the bottom line. Ethical.
And again, again, to not belabor the point again, but and we can come up with our own oral, I don't think I think that's a, not easy task, but it's doable. But again, we're left between a rock and a hard place we have no exam.
I will say with the oral exam, that was a pretty hard directive from Sunset. Last time we went through it, that had to go away. So I think that that's also swimming against the stream.
There was a lot of problem with administering the oral exam and organizing it, and now it's going to be even harder. So I don't think our oral exam is an option.
And I'll just tell you, based on even my own opinions, I was brand new on the board at that point, and coming from like my aviation background, the oral exam of any additional license is a huge part of what we go through, and for very good reason. So I was actually like, no, like I see the why this is important, but the practical aspect of it, and again, from the directive from the Sunset Commission was it has to go. So. Daryl, do you have anything there, or is that, I want to make sure you were more involved in that than I was.
Yeah, the oral exam presents an oral exam where you rely upon a body of volunteers like we used to do is not feasible. That's not going to work. And Sunset does not like an oral exam like what we used to use because of the subjectivity involved in it. They view it as a highly subjective exam. So you would be moving from an exam where y'all have questions about the validity to something that Sunset considers an invalid, highly subjective exam. So you're going to be jumping right in one pot of grease into another pot of grease. So that would not be a direction I would recommend we go.
So one last question. So what is the plan from our discussion today, in the coming weeks or between now and the next board meeting or between?
Here's a question. So the directive, in terms of what we were talking about is issuing an invitation. Dr. Song has been mentioned about data that we need to understand. And then staff's going to be drafting a letter for us to, I don't want to get into the easiest way to do it would be to circulate letter, between now and then, but that would run afoul of Open Meetings Act. So staff's heard our conversation. I'm confident that they'll be able to write a draft of something that is even keeled and it's something, from all of our conversations that should be something we can sign on to. If anybody has there's a line in there that needs to come out because that's just a hard no, I disagree with that part of it. They can make that statement. Hopefully it's something we can all agree to sign.
Yeah, but so you're trying to avoid any like back and forth emails?
Yeah, we're not going to do the back and forth emails of that. I'm just going to let staff write something that is close enough. So then we'll get it fine tuned.
Is the thought process that we invite Dr. Song to the next meeting and then
it's going to be on the agenda.
Basically approve the draft of the letter at the same meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure on timeline.
One step at a time.
So it's also my understanding that y'all want a town hall, a listening session between now and that next meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
With a less than quorum. So.
Yeah.
I'd like to be on it just because I'll be at the next two.
Okay.
Well, candidly, Mr. Chair, we could post it as an open meeting and it still just be a listening session so that all of you could, that's not a problem. So the only negative about that is you got to be wherever you would have to come to wherever there has to be wherever you are has to be open to the public.
Either I'm in Austin or it's someplace in Dallas that is public.
But it could be practically everybody just appear virtually. But
can I ask here in the setting, it's not on the agenda, if how important is it for everyone to be available for that? Because if it's important for the board to all be available and present for that, I'll either come to Austin or either open my office to the public or something. Daryl, do you have a suggestion there?
Okay, candidly, what I was thinking while y'all were debating it is I want to send out links to this meeting and the prior meeting with direct points where the public, I can say, look, you need to go watch this. We are now asking for your direct input in a town hall style meeting. Come talk to these board members at this meeting. And it's going to be an opportunity for a back and forth. It will not be, technically it's a listening session, but you guys will be able to talk back to them and ask them questions.
I'll just decide if we could do it. We're talking about a lunchtime thing anyways. I'll just come down to Austin and make the whole board can come in via Zoom.
Mhm.
That's not too hard for me to do.
That's the easiest thing.
Let's just plan on that.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for taking one for the team there. John.
Yeah.
Do it. That's why they pay me.
Diane.
Okay. Anything else? Any other comments? I just want to say thank you for everybody coming down here. This has been an incredibly productive meeting. Thank you to staff for everything that you guys do in getting us prepared for these. Thank you for the very respectful and thorough discussion of some really big issues today. So without objection, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Hearing no further discussion, meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice seeing everybody in person again. This is
Yeah.
the first
Yes.